Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Dennis Stearns is the founder of Stearns Financial Group and is nationally recognized for complex, ultra-high net worth financial planning and the effect of super trends on clients' investments, business careers, and the economy. He's the author of several books and is regularly quoted in major publications, including the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Kipling Finance, Financial Planning Magazine, and the Journal of Financial Planning. The Financial Planning Association calls Dennis one of the leading financial scenario experts and futurists. He also has considerable experience with super trends on how the convergence of globalization, technology, accelerators in the global age wave, and other forces will dramatically impact our investments, our financial planning, and our careers, and our lives in the future. And I know that includes the effect on deals. So, Dennis, welcome to the DealQuest podcast.
Yep. Thank you, Corey. Great to be here.
So, Dennis, listen, I'm so looking forward to having you share your expertise with the audience, talking about what you do generally, and then talking about your experience both sides of seeing M&A, as a seller, as a buyer, working with people on that, and also, particularly your expertise in these, global trends and how that may affect things. But before we do all that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm assuming a financial advisor, a trend person, a futurist. I'm thinking that probably wasn't it back then, but you tell me.
Yeah, I had no idea back then I'd be called a futurist. But the thing that really got me started on the entrepreneurial journey is when I was 11, my dad gave me a subscription to Forbes magazine.
Wow.
And he said, now pay strict attention to the stories in here of people who succeeded and then got kicked on their ass and how they got up and dusted themselves off and thrived in the future. And it turned out that was extremely good for both my own entrepreneurial things that I do, as well as all the ones that I advise on.
I love that. What a great early lesson. So back then, what were you thinking, what did that mean to you in terms of what you thought you might be doing, as a career or a living or a job? What were you interested in back then?
Well, I was actually a chess master, and I was also training to be an engineer. And then I played on the Pan American chess team and ended up pivoting from aeronautical engineering to what I do now, which is a combination of business consulting and wealth management.
Wow. I love it. And for our audience, I will tell you that during our pre-call, which we do by Zoom, that I happen to have a chess set that shows up in the back of my video when I'm in my home office, as opposed to here in the studio. And Dennis said, "Oh, you play chess?" And I said, yeah, I play chess. And then when I found out his level of chess, I said, well, no, I don't really play chess, anything you consider chess, but, I'm a recreational player. So it'll also be interesting because I know, one of the things you brought into the conversations is how that sort of discipline and mindset and thinking, as a chess master impacts what you do for clients as well. But before we go there, I want to take you back to one other, question looking back, which is, what is the first deal of any type that you were involved in, whether it was for you or maybe someone else, maybe when you're young, early in your career? What comes to mind?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is that I was asked to lead the sale of a company for one of our clients, and it was a chemical company. We had we had decent EBITDA and revenue growth and the moat fundamentals that I talk about in the Ninja Entrepreneur book. But we really wanted to find a good synergistic buyer. And so we went on a worldwide hunt. We found 5 that looked pretty interesting that would want us in North Carolina to be a part of their puzzle grid as they, went across the country. And the one we ended up doing the negotiations with was a German company. And I mean, every culture has a different negotiating style.
Yeah.
And the Germans, they were so precise in everything. And so it was a great first learning episode for me. Now, I was leading a team, and, the team, the good thing that I love about the team concept is you get all the right people on the team and you will minimize the amount of fumbles that you have in the process. And we ended up getting a great deal out of it. We got several turns more on the multiple than we thought we would. And really the key for our business owner was we got a better terms for the whole deal, earnouts and everything else. So ultimately that was a good first one to cut my teeth on.
Yeah, it's funny. There's so much in that, and the cultural. I mean, obviously, listen, there are situations in which stereotypes could be inaccurate or bad or even demeaning, but there are cultural differences that show up, maybe not 100%, but pretty consistently. And my experience in doing deals with the Germans as well is that stereotype, which is, and listen, most stereotypes come from truth, right? Is that precision, that cultural, value and just ingrainment of that precision has been there in every single deal I've ever done culturally with anybody, out of Germany. So, it's definitely been my experience as well. No question. So let's talk a little bit, more about, we'll sort of go more micro and then we can go macro, because I know, you're really known for these trends, but, on a micro level with, that was the first deal experience. So you've been involved in supporting folks on both sides of the table in M&A, domestically and internationally. What are some of the learnings? And for you, I'm particularly interested in, because we've had other folks on who are, whether they're investment bankers or whether they're buyers or sellers or whether they're deal makers, but you bring, two specific things, right? You bring this, chess mindset, chess master mindset, right, to it. And then you also, bring this broader view. And it's fascinating to me because, and I don't want to oversimplify something that's very complex and deep on both sides, but there is this, sort of difference between the focus of a chess master and then this ability to see this broad view. Although I guess in chess, really, you have to see the bigger picture and future moves. So maybe there's some very similarities to being a futurist in that way. But, I'd love to have those perspectives rein in on what you've seen in deals and, what makes them work and what causes problems.
Well, so people seem to always be an issue in different deals that I've been involved with. Surprise, surprise. And so, we had one that I was brought in actually after the fact, and one of the other parts of the advisory team was kind of assembling the dream team on behalf of this client. And so I'm trying to play catch up in terms of understanding what's going on with the attorney side, which, by the way, Corey, would have loved to have had you on that deal, 100%. What's going on the accounting side and all the other elements that we were dealing with due diligence. And come to find out that the accounting side was kind of squishy. And I said, okay, did anybody pre-play this, trying to figure out if we were going to have a problem in due diligence? And everybody kind of looked at each other and said, well, we think we're okay. And of course, that just made me very nervous. And so we started to do some digging. But what ended up happening is the buyer got ahead of us on the digging and found some things that shouldn't have been done on the accounting side. And all of a sudden, the seller is looking at a deal that instead of going off at about 10 million, he was being offered 7. So a $3 million haircut. And so, I guess the fortunate thing there is we had run what we call the master plan, which is the personal financial independence roadmap alongside the business planning. We already had those scenarios built in. And so we were able to adjust it around and say, okay, maybe we can take this deal, depending on the bite of the apple we get, for the growth of this was a roll up of a kind of a blue collar area in the southeastern US, and maybe we'll be fine. And if it doesn't create any additional return, you're fine anyway. You're set for life. And if it does, then you could be in a really good position. Well, fast forward to now, and that deal went forward. We've now had 2 additional bites to the apple. So we've been able to reinvest in 2 separate expanding deal sets that have created, again, millions and millions and millions. So it's being able to not react in a knee-jerk emotional way when stuff happens. And it seems like stuff happens in almost every deal. Some of it's worse than others.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, so many of the points resonate with some of the things that I talk about. I mean, in my Authentic Negotiating book, I talk a lot about ego, right? And that's a situation where it's easy to have somebody's ego come up and, I thought I was getting 10, it's 7, no matter who's at fault or whatever, whether it's logical or not. And so I love that you talk about that. I love this concept of doing the business planning along with the master plan, right, on the business side and the personal side, because that's a way clearly to be able to give a client perspective, right? Like you said. So that's great. And a lot of folks don't. Certainly a lot of folks don't do that, and they certainly don't have it in one person, right, or one firm that can, provide both ends of that. So that's a real value you guys provide to clients in those situations.
Absolutely. And, another important lesson comes to mind. We have a client who had set up a company that does a service to a lot of pretty high level intelligence organizations, including our own CIA, and set up a really nice company. And when we came into the picture, there had been a valuation done by a fancy PhD at a major university, had all the credentials. And so we're looking at this valuation, and we're looking at the balance sheet and the income statement. We're going, okay, this is not computing at all. I don't care if you have the CIA. As a client, in terms of an exit, that just won't work very well. And so we had to be the one that was, don't kill the messenger, that told him, hey, this business is not worth what you thought it was. But the good news is, let's map out a plan so it is worth what you thought it was and maybe some more. So we did that, and we ended up working on a 3-year game plan to try to get revenues and profitability up to a certain point and do some of the other things for, some window dressing, some not, that make a company more attractive. And then again, we went out on a synergistic buyer hunt, and we found one up in Canada who wanted to create a U.S. presence, and they thought this would be a good way to expand. Well, we started off with the CEO of the Canadian entity, and he was saying all the right things, whining and dining our clients, and, it's going to be a love fest going forward. Then the COO, the chief operating officer of that Canadian company, comes in halfway through this whole process and doing due diligence. And this guy, just was like a frozen ice storm. And he was a scary dude too, by the way. And so all of a sudden, it's looking like the deal might go sideways. And then we were able to, get our business owner, it actually flew him up to the headquarters, had him show up unannounced, and the CEO out to dinner, and made everything right. And we ended up having a valuation that was, over 3x what the guy at the university thought it was worth. So it was a happy ending. But again, this goes back to, you just got to be diligent and vigilant and all of those things as you go along on these deals.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier, and it ties into this point, and it ties into actually something that I had posted something a few weeks back on a talk that I did in Detroit, where I was talking about this exact point. So first of all, you talked about essentially pre-due diligence and the fact that, when you came into that situation, you said to the accountants, wait, did we, and then it turned out, And so, folks, listen, if you're not familiar with this, it's amazing to me how many times, if you don't have the right representation, it's not done. I mean, your lawyers, your accountants, your bankers, your financial advisors, all these folks, we all know. I mean, we know what a buyer is. If you're a seller, for example, we know what a buyer is going to be looking for. And you should go through an entire pre-due diligence process to test and find and, put everything together because, it's better off you find it and try to mitigate it or correct it or at least be aware of it going in. If it's not correctable before the buyer, does. And then the other thing this is what I said in that talk and that clip I posted, which is exactly what you said, is I said, listen, you're going to have the CEO or the head of acquisition or whoever it is who signs off on the deal. That's going to be all excited. They're going to tell you how great it's going to be, whatever. And then they send in the due diligence teams. And the thing with the due diligence teams, my point always is, listen, these folks actually, their biggest risk is that they greenlight a deal and then something else, like they say everything's okay, and then something comes up later that they missed. Right. So as opposed to the CEO or whoever it is who said, let the deal's a go, these folks are actually looking for reasons not to do the deal. That's their lens. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You sort of want, if you're on the buyer side, you want your due diligence people. You don't want them to be deal killers, but you want them to be looking out for the problems because you don't want to be surprised later. The problem is sometimes that mentality, can cost the deal if they're too far along on that, or especially if you haven't done your due diligence and you're not prepared. Because my comment is, unfortunately, these folks often think there's fire. If they see smoke, they think there's fire everywhere, and they're always worried about what they don't know, even if they found some little thing. So a great example. Yeah. So what had you? I want to talk a little bit about your journey here, because this unusual combination of things you have. I mean, we represent, frankly, we've represented hundreds of financial advisors who, provide personal financial advice. And I'm not saying that some of those, we have some that are more, than others into also helping on the business side. But, you seem to, bring a unique combination of experience and, you talk even about helping, figure out strategic buyers, about doing this parallel process. What had you sort of create this holistic? What was the experience? What did you bring to the table that said, "Wait, we're going to do a more comprehensive sort of offering to clients on these kind of things you've been talking about"?
Yeah. Well, and so again, a lot of this comes back to my early training and my early exposure to entrepreneurs. And I love entrepreneurs, and I are one. And so, I get all the issues that they deal with. And so we have tried, for decades now to bring more to the table for the entrepreneur, help them think through things, if they're in the earlier stage and they're trying to do growth acceleration of some kind. We've got over 40 different ways to do that within our toolkit. And I'm part of a business innovation lab. And that business innovation lab, we have some just amazing people that are in that lab with me who have been written up in Inc. magazine and Fast Company and a bunch of that stuff. And you hang around those people, and it ignites that entrepreneurism. And, also my study of economics, there's a lot of reasons why the United States is exceptional. One big reason, in my view, is the entrepreneurism and that can-do spirit, that spirit of going around or over or under obstacles, no matter what is coming your way to, you hope that the folks inside the Beltway in Washington are on your side, but periodically they haven't been, and just saying, hey, I'm just going to get it done. And I just love that. And that's the way that in my own entrepreneurial, different companies I have, a venture capital entity that I have, that's the way that I have tried to instill that. And it's just exciting stuff. So the Ninja Entrepreneur book, originally that book was over 600 pages long. We had 2.5 years of research, and we said, okay, nobody's going to read this, even with an adult beverage in hand. And so we skinnied it down to a couple hundred pages, and some of the stories that were interesting got cut, but we just have story after story after story of people who figured out ways to do things in a unique and creative way. And they got paid handsomely to do that. And it's just a beautiful thing.
You and I are so similar in that I love hanging out around entrepreneurs. It's the reason I've been an entrepreneur. I originally joined Entrepreneurs Organization in 2008. I was president of the New York chapter, which is not, it's not usual there are a smaller number of attorneys, let's say, in EO than other businesses. And I spend way more of my time with entrepreneurs than I do with other attorneys. And it's the same fascination you have, like people who are creating new things and, innovation and, really changing the world, and not to mention employing people and, all that kind of great stuff. So you and I share that fascination. I want to talk a little bit about so this trends conversation and looking, at the macro picture, right? That's obviously affects people in their personal financial planning. It affects a lot of different things, but also affects deals. And, we always, even I think futurists will say nobody has a crystal ball and can guarantee anything, right? But one of the things we do, that entrepreneurs do, and that people do, and that financial, and everybody should be doing to some extent, is trying to anticipate trends and understand the impact of them. And while there's no guarantee, it helps you sort of, you want to play the odds a little bit of what you think is going to happen one way or the other. So, in terms of this podcast, in terms of the effect of deals, there's so much out there. Obviously, this is going to air after the election in the U.S., so there's been much talked about that, and we'll see. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but more of the macro trends. Whether it's what's going on in the worldwide economy, or the U.S. economy, whether it's, conflicts around the world, what are you seeing in terms of bigger trends that you think may affect deals? Obviously things that affect generally the economy affect deals, and then if there's anything more specific on that might affect deals, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, there's some big arc of history trends that are really interesting, but they're more interesting on maybe a 5 to 10 year time horizon. And we have some business clients that they do a 5-year plan still, while they have their 1-year plans leading up to the 5 years. And some of that arc of history stuff, like right now we have a deglobalization. So globalization just destroyed a lot of industries in my backyard in North Carolina, furniture, textiles being two of the key ones. And yet, the phoenix rising from the ashes, we have companies coming out of that are doing advanced materials for fighter jets and all kinds of other stuff. And so this techno-industrial revolution that we are in, we're in the early innings. And it is exciting at lots of different levels. It is also concerning at lots of different levels. You outside of the scope of deal making, but the rise of social media and kinds of other things. And so one of the things that we kind of look at is, okay, how can a company, maybe they're an old school type company, but how can they tech enable themselves so that they can create a 1 + 1 = 3 or even 5 kind of multiplier going forward with revenues or with the growth of their profitability. But the other side of that is making sure that their moat is really stable, kind of like the moat around the castle, and making sure that this big disruption coming doesn't upend their apple cart. So, all you have to do is think back to the first industrial revolution and Fisher Body, which back then was, buggy whips and horses, but they were one of the few companies inside their town that had like a dozen companies that did the same thing, that figured out that they should do the pivot over to the automobile.
Yeah.
And all the other companies are lost in the dustbin of history. Well, McKinsey and Company says this industrial revolution, the techno-industrial revolution, is way more powerful, way faster than that first industrial revolution.
Yes.
So it just means we all got to be on our toes more than normal. Then we have actionable things that business owners need to be thinking about. Change in tax law right now at the end of 2025 seems like a decent bet, but there are some scenarios that we're looking at where those taxes will be extended. But if you're going to do an exit, you ought to try to do it when capital gains are at a better rate. The other big one that we're looking at, normally our mantra is 96% of the time, you should ignore geopolitics because all the noisy things going on overseas and even politics inside our own borders, most of the time, they do not impact the economy or finances.
Yeah.
Well, we might be in the 4%. Right? I mean, we got crazy stuff that Hollywood wouldn't even come up with because they'd be laughed out of the movie theater if they suggested that North Korean troops go into Russia to fight the Ukrainians. And the big one that we're actually concerned about for some of our business owners thinking about exits is China invading Taiwan.
Yeah.
And that particular one, the inside the DoD thought process was originally 2028 to 2030, when China would equalize, kind of create parity with our Navy, which, by the way, I never bought. I think the Chinese have a lot of issues. I mean, they just had their most advanced tactical submarine sink in port, brand new, off the line.
Right.
But what has happened is that the Chinese, who are in a world of hurt on all kinds of fronts, economics, debt, you name it, they are looking at Taiwan and advanced chip making in Taiwan. Taiwan produces 90% of the advanced chips of the world. And so they're looking at that and saying, okay, this could be the game changer for us. And if we wait and let all those intellectual property and plants move to the United States and other places, which, by the way, they're starting to do, then we lose that first mover advantage. So there is some belief that it could be as 50% probability that that could happen in the next 3 years. And, 50% is not 90%, but it's a high enough probability that where we have clients that they're already pretty well prepped for a deal to exit, we're getting them moving a little faster because we do not want to be in the middle of something when parachutes appear over Taiwan. That will be a game changer, and probably not World War III, by the way. The main scenarios don't even have a World War III in there. I mean, it's possible, but all the other scenarios, create a risk-off environment for who knows, a year and a half, 2 years, maybe longer.
Yeah, it's interesting that, how things like that, like international conflict, uncertainty, obviously the rise of Chinese power, all of that stuff, can affect things. And, and we're not just talking about, listen, obviously for global, global, international companies, you can see a more direct impact, but why don't you talk a little bit more about, if you're talking about middle market, right? Deals here in the U.S., why those kind of things, have an effect as well, even though somebody may never do any business with China or internationally at all.
Well, and that's the thing is the pandemic taught us a few lessons if we were paying attention. And one of them is how connected the world is. And unfortunately, how connected we are to China. Pharmaceuticals, hospital systems, just industry after industry. We found that there were so many connections to China. And that's why this Taiwan-China scenario is so daunting. It is one of the top 3 most complex scenarios we have ever analyzed. We analyzed some pretty complex ones over the years. And so even middle market companies in the United States, if the potential buyer feels that it's a risk-off environment, maybe instead of 6 times profits or 8 times profits or whatever your business might command, maybe they'll shave 1 or 2 times off of that. And also in that type of environment, vulture capitalists, which we represent several clients who are vulture capitalists, they'll be licking their chops because there will be so many people, so many business owners that are just unprepared, and there'll be deals plenty out there. So we represent a buyer right now, and that buyer is actually building up a war chest. And it's not that he's necessarily hoping that that particular scenario happens. But there's enough other things that go bump in the night. We're doing this right around Halloween time. There's enough other things that go bump in the night that, having some extra cash around for potential opportunity is not a bad thing.
Yep.
And by the way, if some of the more daunting scenarios happen, having more cash around might mean that you survive whatever it is we go through.
Right. And how to take advantage of, folks that it runs trouble who, may be able to be on sale for the cheap. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to CoreyCupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. You mentioned this deglobalization, which, and you mentioned in a little bit of a separate conversation, the impacts and lessons of COVID, but these things come together, right? I mean, I know that, the focus on the supply chain issues during COVID, especially, and things like that. I mean, there's a whole political realm around, tariffs and all this stuff, whatever. But there's also, even outside of the politics of it, there's just a recognition of the fragility of, the interconnectedness, like you said, and the fragility of the supply chain that COVID made clear. And that is, causing, I know, some industries where there's been real, reshoring or, as they call it, or, domestic production. So talk a little bit more about that aspect of it, the deglobalization conversation.
Yeah. Well, so, the pop quiz is, who is our number one trading partner today? And it's not China. It's actually Mexico. And however, Mexico has a lot of interesting connections and ties to China. So again, this kind of comes back to the chess discipline of not just thinking about the current line of play, but thinking about, the second and third effects that can happen off of some of these situations. The big arc of history trend is that you're trying to get, many manufacturers and service providers are trying to get closer to their customer. And that's where the reshoring comes in, that they're moving facilities back into the United States. The chip manufacturers are moving back for another reason that we talked about a little bit ago. And so there's this concept that the United States is a very robust market. I mean, it remains one of the most robust in the world. And so moving facilities or people or intellectual capital, whatever it is, back here is a good thing. I recently attended an event with Peter Zehan, the guy who wrote Accidental Superpower and all kinds of other books, brilliant guy. And, his premise of U.S. exceptionalism is not over. Mm-hmm. And we have so many things that sometimes we take for granted and sometimes they get lost in all this weird political debate we get and everything else. The United States has a lot going for it still. Now, do we have our problem? Sure. But we have so many things from agriculture to technology that will help us in this next phase of the techno-industrial revolution. There's a concept called the deployment stage in a techno-industrial revolution. And several very smart people just recently said, we're there, that we are now deploying technology into profitable areas that will just expand and expand and expand. And that can help non-technical companies. So one of the things, I'm on the board of the North Carolina Technology Association, and one of the things that we have as a mantra is, okay, we've got Google and we've got, some small tech companies, and we've got a lot of technology companies under our umbrella, but come to us if you're a non-tech company, because we can help you figure out how to tech enable. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the sleeper trends that's out there of, and it's maybe not so sleeper. In the Ninja Entrepreneur book, I actually have an interview with one of the top AI guys in the world. And he is directly helping a major Fortune 500 company that is old school, Fortune 500. He's helping them tech enable with AI, all the way from the C-suite to the janitor. And the kinds of things that's going to allow that company to do in the future are amazing. And so back to the deal space, I myself, as well as several friends, we are out there looking for those old school companies that can use that tech enabling to really create a multiplier effect. And we don't have to pay crazy prices like you have to pay for some of the tech companies.
Yeah, it's a really interesting trend that I see it on two ends or two, areas. One is just these larger old school companies. Certainly you see, I mean, I know somebody is doing a lot of in AI around healthcare and Medicaid billing and this kind of stuff or whatever, where like it's, there's huge opportunities. Then I also see it with smaller, more Main Street, again, blue collar, so to speak, Main Street kind of trades and business like that are traditionally not tech enabled, where there are roll ups or, I guess people coming in, with tech enabled platforms and efficiencies, and then they're buying these folks up. Right. And it's they're taking away all the billing and the marketing and the whatever and just let them, these folks do their trades. So there's an opportunity there as well to create significant efficiencies in that space. I'm seeing it, being done there. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting trend. I want to ask, so it's interesting. You made this comment about that there are things that underlie and that sometimes get overshadowed by like the political, right? And so I'm going to ask the question that could be so politically loaded, but I do think that underneath the politics, there's there's an important analysis of the economics, right? So we're talking about this reshoring, we're talking about this, the deglobalization. One of the reasons why, it's not the only driver, but there's a big driver of globalization was labor cost differences, right? I mean, the ability, right? I mean, that's a huge drive. I mean, you're the futurist, I'm not. But clearly, obviously the ability to pay people in these various countries a lot less money, even if you're paying them twice their local wage, so they're thrilled. It's still, a quarter or, or sometimes 10% of what you got to pay people here, right? And that was certainly a driver. Now we've seen, the risks of that. And in some areas, that's going, I mean, virtual assistants, all this kind of stuff, that's even more of a trend. But in certain areas that, it is trying to onshore it. Well, at the same time, we have forces in the U.S. that are anti, at least illegal immigration, right? And again, without getting into the politics of that, what do you see in terms of the trends in terms of the workforce, right? And the just, having the kind of workforce and the economics of that workforce to be able to be competitive internationally if we're bringing, more of this back home where labor tends to be more expensive. And some would argue, I mean, even I know a number, again, I don't want to get into politics, but I know a number of conservative Republican folks who run businesses who say, I cannot run my business without immigrant labor. And of course we can, get into undocumented versus illegal, whatever. But the point is there could be a labor force challenge that some people have raised in some of this. And I'd love outside the politics for you to talk about what you think is the trends there and the risks or the opportunities.
Yeah, well, and we actually, in the Ninja Entrepreneur book, we have a great chapter on talent management and, how creative companies are finding better talent and how they're keeping them. And that particular piece, we have an advantage over China. We have an advantage over Russia. You look at their demographics and they have this dearth of people who are, in their 20s, and it's disappearing. I mean, in Russia's case, many of them just left the country when the war started, and now they've been feeding them into this meat grinder in Ukraine and losing 1,200 soldiers a day. And so they're in a world of hurt going forward. I mean, they were already in a difficult environment. In the United States, we've had the advantage that at least we are still having babies and relatively balanced babies, in terms of I think, average is still around 2 kids per family. And yes, some of the younger folks are waiting longer to have babies, but then they're still having babies. And then the people coming into this country, we're getting the advantage of the brain drain happening in other parts of the world.
Yes.
Now, again, the question is, do we go Australia's approach with more skilled immigrants in terms of how many we allow in? Or do we try to balance it out and certainly eliminate the illegal immigration ease? And the answer from all the credible economists that I hang around with is we got to have both. And if we don't have both in this future, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Back to your comment about people that are having trouble figuring out, how can they balance out their labor pool. Well, the labor pool of the future has got to have both. This is a classic, you can't do one or the other. You got to have an and.
Yeah.
And so this is what in chess master terms we call the third line of play, which is get all the pieces moving together. You just can't win with your queen or your bishop or whatever. You got to have them working together. And so, friends of mine have been in Washington trying to educate all the people in Congress on this stuff. And interestingly enough, a lot of them get it. But a lot of them are playing the short game or they're playing checkers, or I don't know what game they're playing.
Yeah. Well, they're playing politics is really what they're playing.
They're playing politics, which is a dirty game to begin with. So
it's unfortunate, and this is a nonpartisan comment. It's just that the driver of most politicians to get reelected, sometimes override, like you said, that they know what's right. It's just that if something's a trend, that's going to take 5 years and they're not going to get reelected in the meantime. They sometimes make different decisions, in both parties. So that's unfortunate. It's why even if it's with regard to various of the proposals, I'm always interested in what the economists and the smart people are saying about the impact, because it's easy to say we're going to do X or Y or Z because it's politically expedient or it'll get your votes, but how is it really going to affect things going forward? And that's, and as a deal maker and somebody, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're an attorney or an advisor doing deals, the real impact on the economy, the real impact on deal flow, on interest rates, on capital, on whatever is what's really going to affect things, right, in the deal market, not what the political promises and rhetoric is necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it all works together. And I'll give you one quick example, Corey, that actually fits into some of these gee whiz kinds of techno-industrial stuff going on.
Yeah.
So we have a client that has been working on a system so that everybody in the company can work off of iPads or similar kinds of technology. And the stuff that's happening in the background, it's not gee whiz AI machine learning stuff. It's just really smart, what are called expert system types of programs.
Yeah.
And so he can hire people who have good common sense. College education, okay, fine. Maybe that'll help you in your job. But if you don't have good common sense, I don't want you as an employee. If you're not interested in a meritocracy, I don't want you. And so all this technology stuff is now allowing him to hire people who don't have massive training, but they can figure stuff out in conjunction with other parts of his organization. And he just got an offer that was 50% above what most people would think would be reasonable. And part of it was when the acquiring company came in, and it was not a private equity company, I can tell you, it was a synergistic company. When they came in and they saw what they were doing, they went, holy cow, we need this for all of our companies.
Right.
And of course, it was at that light bulb moment that we all looked at each other and said, okay, we can sell this at a premium, even to the premium. So
yeah, because it's interesting because obviously, listen, what something is worth as is, they're looking at on essentially, a pro forma basis on, hey, how much will this, when we apply this across the rest of our entire organization or, our companies, how much benefit are we going to get? And that upside is huge. And listen, smart buyers and sellers, a seller's not going to get all of that additional upside because there's got to be room for what the buyer's going to get. But at the same time, if they don't get some of that, they're leaving some money on the table because there's value beyond what sits in that, what you've accomplished in your own company. So that's a great example. I love it. Listen, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I wish we had hours. But, I don't run a 3-hour podcast like, like some of the folks out there. I feel like with you, I should. But in any case, before I get to my final two questions, I do want to give you an opportunity. Are there any other major trends or even, more about any of the resources you have out that, that would be really interesting to folks? And then I'll close out my last couple of questions.
Yeah, I think we covered some of the key ones, or at least the key ones that are actionable shorter term.
Yeah.
There's just a whole bunch of other things that are longer arc that I don't think are necessarily actionable today. And, one of the things that anybody who's listening can go to our website, stearnsfinancial.com, and we have a moat analysis in there where you can go in and say, okay, how healthy is my moat? Does it have the right amount of crocodiles and water, or is it a leaky moat? And trust me, you don't want a leaky moat if you're going into a deal cycle. We also have a way that you can request a exit preparedness, a prep for growth. I mean, there's other things that we can do. And so again, anybody who mentions this show, mentions DealQuest, will get a free evaluation on that. And so again, that's at stearnsfinancial.com. The Ninja Entrepreneur book has a ton of stories, a lot of fun stories, I think, about, again, how can you kind of make something special happen? And for most entrepreneurs, maybe exiting is their end game, but maybe they're passing it to the next generation. And so, again, love to connect with anybody who wants to try to figure out how to do that.
Great. And I'm sure they can find that book in all the usual places, plus links on your website.
Correct. Yeah. All the usual places, plus the Audible book, Spotify book is coming out shortly. So.
Oh, great. That's great. So Dennis, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Yeah, freedom to me means having the freedom to enjoy all the things that we enjoy in this country, which again, I think some people take for granted. And for me personally, the way I've set up my, multiple businesses is to set them up with people who are smart, who are capable, can figure out how to adapt so that I'm not a slave to those businesses, so that I can actually take a vacation and I'm not constantly on my, smartphone or other devices trying to answer questions, and that I have a comfort level that things are being handled. They may not be handled exactly the way I do, but hey, that's okay if the job gets done.
Yeah, I love that. And listen, I know for me, when I want to have time to be able to sort of think and plan and look at big picture stuff and a lot of the future stuff you do, like if you're in the day-to-day, in the weeds, it's near impossible to do that. It's just you need different space, different mindset and whatever. So, in your case, I can see that freedom really allows you to do some of that special sauce that you do bring. Dennis, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you so much, Corey. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.